It was late September when I moved into the cabin. When the aspens turned gold, and the air smelled like pine resin and cold earth, I finally found some respite. After 15 years amid constant noise in the city, the sirens, the hum of traffic, or neighbors, it was silence that I craved. This cabin was exactly what I needed. 12 miles from civilization with no visible neighbors. In the quiet of the sky and forest that could settle into your bones with the amount of peace it produced. My first few weeks went exactly as I had dreamed. I fell asleep to the wind nestling through the trees and woke to birdsong, lively chirping in the background. I also learned to identify all the sounds I heard around me, whether it was the rustle of a deer moving through the underbrush, the screech of a red-tailed hawk, or the crack of branches settling in the cold. I sat on the porch with my tea one night, just listening to absolutely nothing. Beautiful, to say the least. Then, the first disturbance. I came across it on a Thursday mid-October. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up to the scraping sound, something near the back of the cabin. It wasn't loud, just persistent. Something dragging against the exterior wall. I lay there listening, trying to place it and figure out who it was. But after a few minutes of making the noise, it stopped. I reasoned it must have been a raccoon or some other animal, maybe a branch swinging in the wind. I went back to sleep unharmed. But then it was there again 2 nights later, the same exact time, the same exact location. But this occurrence lasted longer. This occurrence may have been 5 minutes, and then it stopped abruptly. I got up, checking the back door, just to find it was locked, shining a flashlight through the window. But there was nothing except my own reflection in the darkness beyond. I walked the perimeter in the morning, but nothing. No marks, no fallen branches, no tracks near the wall at all. It was the 3rd week in October by the time it started happening every few nights. It always happened between 1 and 3 a.m., keeping me from a good night's sleep. Sometimes it was scraping. Other times it was a soft thud against the side of the house. And still other times footsteps, or what sounded like footsteps at least, circling from the back of the house to the side. I just waited there, hoping that it was nothing, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I listened, I checked, and always nothing. It had to be animals, I told myself. Bears even, although I had seen no claw marks or scat. Possibly deer bumping into things, or branches I couldn't identify in daylight. The woods were full of sounds, and maybe I just didn't understand some of them yet. This had to be normal, right? Just had to be adjusting. But then, the sounds started to change. They started moving closer and closer to the windows. There was one night in particular, when I heard something directly outside my bedroom with a slow, methodical dragging sounding like fabric against glass. I turned on every light as soon as I could and looked out the window. There was nothing, just my pale face staring back at me in the black forest beyond. I even checked the motion sensor light on the porch, and it hadn't been triggered. The sleeping got worse. I told myself during the day that I was just being ridiculous, letting isolation get the best of me. But it was at nighttime, lying in the dark, that I heard it. Footsteps on gravel, the soft creak on the porch step, or a pause at the front door, waiting. And then one night in early November, I heard it breathing. It wasn't animal breathing, nor the heavy panting of a dog or the snuffling of wildlife outside. No, this was measured, controlled, like a human. It came from just outside my bedroom window, patient, rhythmic, even. I didn't move because I didn't want to believe that my life was somehow in danger. And after what felt like an hour, it stopped. Just as it had appeared, so it ceased to exist. That's when I found it, the next morning, a cigarette butt in the gravel just beneath that window. It was relatively fresh. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been there the whole time. Maybe it was there when I moved in, or from a previous tenant. But I knew I had raked that area myself about 3 weeks ago. And that butt wasn't weathered either. It had been there recently. The doors, the windows, the crawlspace entrance. Everything was locked and secure, but small things felt out of place. There was the chair on the porch I didn't remember moving. nor the muddy footprints on the back step, which weren't quite my size. The woodpile looked disturbed, with pieces restacked slightly differently from where I left them. Time to call the sheriff's office. The deputy who came out was polite yet skeptical about what I had shared with him over the phone. He decided to walk the property and check the doors, telling me to get better locks and maybe a security camera. "I've got to say, you're pretty isolated out here," he mentioned. "It's probably just someone passing through. Hikers or some homeless folks looking for a warm spot." He almost made it sound reasonable to me, as if it were comforting. Fine. That night I wedged a chair under the front door handle, and then I wedged another one under the back door, keeping the lights on because I couldn't sleep. I stayed up what felt like forever. Then at 2:47 a.m., I heard the front door handle turn. It was slow, deliberate even, testing the weight as the chair held its place. The handle released. Then I heard the footsteps move around inside of the house. They went to the back where the handle turned there too. Slow and just as careful. The chair scraped against the floor, but it held its place. I grabbed my keys and phone and stood in the center of the living room, shaking, knowing I was at the mercy of whatever was out there. The footsteps then moved around to the bedroom window, and they stopped. Everything went silent, and I waited. 5 minutes, then 10. I heard it then. A soft scraping sound that was different than before. It was metal on metal. It was deliberate. It was methodical. It was the crawlspace door. I had checked it before and locked it, but the sound of slow, patient work continued. Someone was trying to get underneath the house. I didn't wait to see if they would succeed. I instantly ran to the front door, shoving the chair aside and getting to my car. The motion light flicked on as I exited the cabin, illuminating nothing but empty yard and trees. I drove with my headlights off until I reached the main road. Then I called 911. The sheriff came out with 3 deputies, searching everything. The house, the crawlspace, the surrounding woods, and found that the crawlspace lock had been jimmied but not broken. They also found more cigarette butts and footprints that weren't mine. They didn't find anyone, however. I stayed in town that night and then the next, and on the 3rd day, I decided to go back with a deputy to collect my things. While I was packing, I noticed something I had missed before. It was a small gap in the back wall of the bedroom closet, barely visible behind my hanging clothes. It looked deliberate, as if someone had pried the boards apart just enough to create a space a person could fit in if they were patient enough, if they didn't mind waiting. The instant I saw that was the moment I left everything behind except for essentials I already recovered. The instant I saw that. That was 3 months ago. I now live in town where there are neighbors, traffic, and light pollution. I get better sleep here for the most part. However, sometimes, when it's quiet, late at night, I wonder how long that cabin had been someone else's before I moved in. How many nights I slept while someone stood in my closet, just waiting, breathing in the dark. I wonder if they're still there, waiting in the cabin for someone else. Around the time I turned 13, my parents gradually began trusting me with independence. One of the first freedoms I was granted was being home alone. They always picked me up and dropped me off from school, and if neither of them were home, they hired a babysitter. So I was never alone before. One night, my parents went on a date without leaving me with a babysitter for the first time ever. I was excited as I felt it was long overdue. My friends talked about being home alone all the time, which made me realize I kind of had helicopter parents. Honestly, the first hour was disappointing. Everything was the exact same, only there was nobody in it but me. Despite the lack of authority figures around, I still didn't feel like I could break any rules without getting in trouble. I thought about doing so earlier, but at the moment of truth, I was too scared. Looking back, I think I was self-enforcing on my parents' expectations. Like I literally couldn't comprehend the ramifications of being alone, but I didn't understand any of that at the time. All I felt was this eerie unease. I was at home, yet somehow in unfamiliar territory. Then, I started to doubt if I was even alone. As I was standing aimlessly in the living room, I saw a blip of movement at the front door, the same crossing of a shadow that comes right before someone enters or knocks, except it was followed by silence. On reflex, I went to my tiptoes, like I had nearly been caught sneaking around past bedtime. I crept up to the door and looked out the side window. I saw the front porch empty, just like the rest of the house, save for the cluster of moths bouncing around the porch light. To get comfortable, I went upstairs to my room. I wanted to close my door, but even though I knew I could, I didn't. I usually wasn't allowed to, and I still wasn't ready to go breaking the rules. Of course, I didn't think it would make a difference, since I was home alone. Feeling nervous and needing to do something with my hands, I sat at my desk and opened my journal. I turned to a blank page, wrote the date at the top, then tried to collect my thoughts about being home alone for the first time. I was too anxious to write for what must have been several minutes. But any concentration I might have had was quickly shattered. Downstairs, I heard the crack of a door opening. I wasn't sure which door it was, though tiny change in air pressure I felt meant it let outside. I rushed to my window to see if my parents had come home early, but the driveway was empty. Still, I waited for them to call me downstairs, to ask me how my time went. I stood in front of my door, still impatient, listening for their voices. Instead, after another minute or two, I heard my mother's bathtub faucet spring open. It was very distant, but that distinct sloshing roar was unmistakable. Mother loved her baths, but she certainly wasn't home. So then who the hell was in her tub? In a moment of panic, I suddenly felt like I would be trapped in my room, so I quietly made my way down the stairs. The sound of the faucet dissipated as I descended, until it was gone as I hit the ground floor. Part of me decided that I needed to be ready to leave the house in case something happened, so I made my way back to the front door. On my way there, I passed by my parents' room. The master bathroom with my mother's fancy tub was in there. Yet unlike I thought, the faucet hadn't been closed. It was just dripping. I was close enough to hear it, obedient enough to know I'd get in trouble if I didn't close it, but fully aware that the punishment for leaving the house would be worse. The decision was paralyzing. Either the known danger of night, or the unknown specter lurking in the darkness of that unlit bathroom. The thought of going in terrified me, but I was too scared to run. Finally, I simply turned around and went back up to my room. I didn't care if I got blamed for letting the faucet drip, or even if my parents caught me with my door closed. I had to save myself the only way I could think. For the first time, I closed and locked my door, then sat up against it. I buried myself in my confusion and fear. I hid, waiting for it to be over. 2 bitterly slow hours later, I heard my parents driving in. I stood up, wiped the dried tears off my face, opened my door, and put on the act. I went downstairs to meet them, planning to act innocent if they asked about the bathtub. But when they asked me a completely different question, I nearly broke down. My mother asked me if her older brother had ever come by to check on me. They asked him to make sure I was okay since it was my first time home alone, though they weren't sure if he would make it. Suddenly, everything clicked. Who else had access to the house? And who else knew I was alone in it but him? My own uncle. It must have been him. At the time, I stammered but managed to lie and said that nobody had come. I didn't fully understand what had gone down, but I was worried I'd never see an ounce of freedom again if I started making accusations, or if I even admitted that someone else had been in the house. Years later, I still don't know 100% if it was truly my uncle, but I've never trusted him since. I believe he had a sinister idea on his way to check on me. He tried to lure me into a dark space where I wouldn't be able to see him, so he could get away with something he probably always wanted to do.
A few weeks ago, I picked up a house-sitting gig. It paid well, so I figured the owners had a lot of valuables they didn't want to get stolen. But when I was staying in their house, I discovered something that is still giving me nightmares nearly a month later. The rules were few. I could do as I pleased, as long as I kept the place clean and didn't have guests. I didn't have to worry about taking care of the garden, but the only place I wasn't allowed to go to was the shed in the backyard. All told, I was supposed to be there for a week. It took me a couple of nights to get comfortable sleeping there, but by day 3, I was mostly settled in. However, just as I got comfortable, I started to feel unwelcome. I hadn't broken any rules, yet for some reason, I felt like I was being watched somehow. I spent several paranoid hours looking for a hidden camera, but I couldn't find any. That evening, I picked up a random book and sat on the back porch, thinking a bit of reading and some fresh air would help. In all honesty, the backyard was beautiful. The owners clearly took pride in it. Even the shed didn't look like an afterthought. It was made in the same style as the rest of the house, with a shingled roof, a well-sealed door, and a window on one side. Still, it was just a shed, and I barely cared about its existence or what was inside it that I wasn't allowed to see. Not at first, anyway. While I was stuck trying to get through the first few pages of the book I picked up, I noticed a flash in my peripheral vision. If I wasn't mistaken, the light inside the shed flicked on, but by the time my eyes focused, it was off again. That, or it had always been off. I really couldn't tell. After staring at it for a bit and not seeing any changes, I figured I was mistaken. Probably just another light in someone else's backyard, flickering through some trees, or maybe I just completely imagined it. Either way, I decided reading wasn't my jam, so I went back inside and opened a bottle of wine. That seemed to help my mind stop running on overdrive, and after watching TV for a couple hours, I went up to the guest room and slept. The next morning, I woke up with a minor headache and the return of the same nagging anxiety from before. I'd already checked everywhere I could think of for something weird in the house, so the only place left to look was the shed. Of course, I wasn't supposed to enter it, but I was never explicitly told I couldn't peek through the window. I got dressed, and I went out and stuck my face up against the glass, trying to cup my hands around my eyes for a better view. But it was truly pitch black in there. Disappointed, I gave up and got ready for work. Even though I was getting paid to house sit, I figured I could pick up a few shifts for even more cash. Maybe even shake my nerves about the place. That night, I got back to the house and immediately took a shower. I wasn't thrilled that there was a window over the tub, but I figured nobody was looking through it. I did start to think I should risk getting in trouble and invite a friend over to keep me company, so I went back downstairs to the living room. I had my phone out, thinking of who to call. Just then, as I was standing near the entrance to the backyard, I noticed a light I could have sworn I'd never seen before, except maybe once. It was the light inside the shed, shining through the window. I wasn't sure if it had just turned on, or if I hadn't noticed, but one thing was painfully clear. There was a person inside. Their silhouette was in full view, motionless and backlit, but I knew they were looking at me. There was nothing else to look at, and I was barely dressed. I knew I had to get the hell out immediately. I ran to both the doors and made sure they were locked. Then I rushed upstairs and threw all my belongings into a bag. I didn't double check or clean anything. I just ran downstairs and out of the house, right into my car parked in the driveway. As I drove away, I called the owners of the house, telling them there was someone in the shed. They kept telling me I must be mistaken, but I told them exactly what I saw. Then they went quiet, and I realized they must be hiding something. I asked them if they knew, and after forcing it out of them, they admitted it. The whole time I was meant to be alone in their house, they neglected to tell me about their son who lived in the shed. They said it was air-conditioned and furnished, but he just had a lot of problems with, well, I don't know, because that's when I hung up. I didn't want to hear about what kind of freak I had been neighbors with for the past 4 days. How much he might have seen of me, or worst of all, if he had a way to get inside the house. Now that I'm thinking about it, it feels very intentional. If someone was living there already, why hire a house sitter? I don't think it's a coincidence they hired a woman either. In some sick way, it feels like they wanted us to meet. To what end? I don't care to consider. Afterwards, the owners kept calling and texting me, apologizing for the misunderstanding and begging me to come back. When I ignored them, they sent me the money for the days I spent there, and then asked me to not call the police. I hate to admit no crime was committed, but while I'm not going to put their name and address on blast for fear of getting sued, I'm sure as hell going to tell everyone about this. Back when I still lived with my parents, I had an encounter that changed the way I think. I used to not be a paranoid or anxious person when it came to safety, until this one night. My parents had a 2-car garage that was attached to the house via the back door. We went in and out that door quite frequently, and since it was protected by the garage doors, which only opened to one of our clickers, we kept it unlocked. On top of that, we had a security system that chimed whenever a door or window opened or closed, though we only armed it when we were going away and leaving the house unoccupied. Otherwise, it just felt like a nuisance. I would come to change my mind about that. One night, I was home with my parents, and while cooking dinner, my dad accidentally tripped the kitchen breaker. Apparently, he was running the microwave, the air fryer, and the blender at the same time, overloading the circuit they were all connected to. No big deal. They just sent me to reset the breaker. The panel was close by in the garage, so I didn't mind. But when I opened the back door and stepped inside the garage, I stopped in my tracks. Something wasn't quite right. Something tiny and almost insignificant. It took me a moment to figure it out. The lights were already on. Usually, when I went into the garage, it would be completely dark for a moment. Then the lights would turn on. The main light in the garage is motion activated, so it only comes on when it detects movement. I was pretty sure that nobody had been in or out of the garage for at least an hour, more than long enough for the light to turn itself off. Of course, it was the tiniest thing, easily chalked up to be the lights being old or glitching, or any number of reasons. More important to me at the time was resetting the breaker, so I went over to the panel, found the flip switch, and then reset it before going back into the house. I didn't lock the door or set the alarm behind me. I didn't feel a reason to, and I never did for the rest of the night. The next day was a Saturday. I was home from school, but my parents were both busy running errands all day. After the little trouble cooking dinner the previous night, they decided to eat out that evening, though I asked them to just bring me something, as I kind of hated third-wheeling my parents. So, I was alone pretty much all day and into the night. I enjoyed the quiet hours playing video games in my room. Then, around 9 p.m., I heard the alarm system chime. I figured it was my parents coming home from dinner, so I expected to hear them talking any second. But there was only silence. Feeling hungry, impatient, and a little confused, I paused my game and listened more intently. Still nothing. Nobody calling me to come eat. I was home alone, and yet the door had opened somewhere. At least, that's what I was being told. Suddenly, an unnerving idea popped into my head, forced me to get up, carefully checking every window and door to make sure they were locked and untampered with. Then it hit me. The back door was always unlocked. I rushed over to it, hoping I wasn't walking into a trap, trying to convince myself I was freaking out over nothing. When I reached the back door, I hesitated, second-guessing myself. Eventually, I got the nerve to walk up to it. I put my fingers on the deadbolt, knowing my parents would be annoyed when they walked into a door that was always supposed to be open without a second thought. But feeling certain I had to do what we never did, lock the back door. The second I threw the bolt, I felt a rush of relief. The mere sound of it was satisfying. I stepped back, thinking there was a chance I had been too late. But then something very different happened. Without warning, the door shook. The handle twisted as the door yanked back into the bolt. Someone was on the other side, and they were trying to pull it open. I freaked out and ran off to barricade myself in my room and call the police. I didn't know if that person was going to try and break in and get me or what. but I wasn't taking any chances. Yet, before I finished dialing, I heard another sound. The garage door opening. With my senses heightened from the adrenaline, I could hear the hum through the walls. And when I looked out my window and saw headlights, I knew my parents were coming home. Fearing they were in danger, I ran back to the garage. I was afraid they were going to get out of the car and get attacked. But when I barged in, they were walking up to the door like nothing was wrong. I told them what was going on, and they seemed worried for a minute. But after we looked around and closed the garage door, they concluded everything was fine. I asked if they had seen anyone running out when they came in, but they just shrugged. Afterwards, my mind was reeling. I'm still 100% certain to this day that someone was in the garage, but I know nothing else about who they were, what they wanted, or how long they were in there. At least a day, right? They had to have snuck in behind a car at some point, but they could have opened the garage door from the inside and left anytime they wanted. I think they weren't aware of the security system when they tried entering the house, and maybe that's why they backed off. Then got freaked out when I locked the door, feeling like they'd been caught in a trap. All I know is that despite everyone saying I'm overthinking all of this, something terrible could have happened that night, and I'm going to make sure I never get that close again.
This was 2018. My wife's birthday was coming up, and she'd really been bugging me about wanting a treadmill. She'd been wanting one for years, but those things are crazy expensive. On a tight budget, the only option that felt reasonable was to get one used. I scrolled on Craigslist for several days, looking for anything that stood out as a good deal, but it was hard to know what was good and what wasn't. But after a few days, I did stumble on one that seemed to be both in good shape and not overpriced. Looked very lightly used. I contacted the guy, who sent me his phone number so we could talk about finding a time to meet up. His name was Terrence. We never called. Everything we discussed was over text, but he didn't seem pushy or weird in any way. Just some guy looking to get rid of a treadmill that his wife also had wanted, but ended up never using. The only minor issue with this Terrence guy was that he seemed to always be working very late hours. He said he did the closing shift at his job, and always got out at 10 p.m. That was a bit late for me, knowing he was already about a 45-minute drive from my place. So we kept going back and forth on plans for me to pick it up, never really setting anything up yet. Until one night, around 8:30, he texted me that he was getting out of work early this night and asked if I was available. At this point, my wife's birthday was just in a few days, so with not much time left, I agreed to just head down there that night. I drove to my brother's place to borrow his pickup truck, then drove out to the address Terrence sent me. Before leaving, I tried doing a quick search of it online to see if there was a street view of the house, just to have an idea of what I was pulling up to. And while there was a Google Street View of the road his house was on, I couldn't actually see his house, or any other houses on the street for that matter. Regardless, I headed down there. I don't live in the biggest town/city. A lot of houses are far out, and so this one also being far away and what you'd consider to be in the middle of nowhere wasn't that unusual. His house was in one of those older neighborhoods that didn't really feel like a neighborhood. There was just one long, winding gravel road through the woods with smaller paths/driveways leading into the trees. My maps didn't even recognize those paths as drivable and told me I'd reached my destination before even turning down the one Terrence's house was on. I drove a good ways down it, I'd say almost a quarter mile, before reaching his house. It was massive, for lack of a better word. A huge mansion, settled right in the middle of the trees. One of those old brick-style ones, with pillars on the outside, and vines that climbed up the outer walls. It was not the house I expected to see from a guy selling a used treadmill on Craigslist of all places. I parked and headed up to the front door. I could hear the knocks echo through the whole inside of the home. A minute later, Terrence opened the door. He was a tall but thin man, probably in his early 30s. He said the treadmill was just upstairs in one of the spare bedrooms. He started to lead me inside and up the stairs. The inside of this mansion was probably exactly what you're imagining. Old furniture everywhere, outdated wallpaper, and it even had a musty smell. Not like it was abandoned though. He clearly lived here. It just had a very strange, almost haunting feeling. I did not like being in there. When we got up the staircase, there was this massive hallway with probably 8 to 10 doors. Some were open, some were closed. As he led me down the hall, I glanced into a few of the open doors, not necessarily looking for anything, just doing it out of habit. When we passed one of the doors on the left of the hallway, sort of in the middle, I caught sight of something really fucking creepy. There was a man sitting on the edge of a large bed, facing the doorway, and just looking at me with a hollow, dead stare. I quickly shifted my eyes away and didn't say anything. Terrence didn't say anything either, showing me into the last door at the very end of the hallway. The only thing in this room was the treadmill. I awkwardly stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting for him to go in, before he patted me on the back and told me to take a look, that I could test it out or do whatever I wanted to make sure it was good for me. I smiled and walked over. Didn't really know what to do, so I just turned it on and made sure it seemed to function like I thought it would. While I heard a soft creaking sound from the hallway, like a door moving. I looked up at Terrence, and he was looking down the hallway, giving this cold, demanding stare. Then he looked back at me, pretending like nothing happened. "So, do you like it?" "Oh, yeah, looks good to me." He said great, and that he was gonna go get something to help us move it downstairs and into my truck. He then hurried away from the room before I could say anything. I heard his footsteps go down the hall and to the first floor. I stayed in the room, not really sure what else to do. A few seconds later, I heard a different set of footsteps. At first, they were soft, walking into the hallway, and then all of a sudden, they sprinted from the other end of the hallway, straight down to the room I was in. But they stopped right before appearing in the doorway. "Hello?" I called out. I knew he was standing right in the hallway, just out of sight. I could hear him breathing. I took a few steps closer to the doorway, and just before I reached it, suddenly the man sprinted back down the hall. I only caught a glimpse of him running into the bedroom and slamming the door shut. I think I mumbled something like, "What the f*** was that?" under my breath, really unnerved by whatever that was. "Terrence?" I called out his name. It echoed through the entire mansion. The only noises in response were the low thuds and creaks from the old house settling in the wind. I started getting this aching feeling in my gut, telling me not just to leave, but to run. I fought it though, and instead slowly moved down the upper hallway. "Terrence, you still there?" I called out again, with no response. I passed by the door to the room I saw the man run into, but it was silent in there. I couldn't fight the feeling anymore, sensing something was about to go sideways real fast, and ran for the staircase. Right when I got down the first step, I saw Terrence hurrying up from the bottom. When he saw me, he quickly shifted his right hand behind his back and looked at me with wide, guilty eyes. We didn't speak for a second, just looking at each other. "Everything okay, bud?" I was frozen. I didn't know what he was hiding behind him, but it definitely could not be anything to help move the treadmill with, like he had said. He could probably read my face that I knew something was wrong, but I knew I just needed to get past him and out of this house. I was just gonna head out to my truck to grab the cash, if that's alright. Terrence kept his eyes on me, weirdly thinking about it, like he was deciding whether or not to let me. But then, after a few seconds, his face grew into a wide, fake smile, and he said okay. He moved toward the wall, as if to let me walk past him. I paused for a moment, then slowly walked down. I moved past him, feeling his eyes watching me, and anticipating the possibility that something would happen. But I got to the door and hurried to the truck. It was dark, so I didn't notice it at first, but right when I got in and sat down, I could feel the truck leaning to one side and knew he had slashed the tires. I didn't care. I just pulled out and drove with the flats all the way out of the neighborhood. I did notify the police station, but nothing worth noting really happened. They tried to talk to Terrence, but he refused to answer any questions, and I had no proof of any wrongdoing, or that he was the one that slashed the tires on my brother's truck, so it got nowhere. I find myself genuinely disturbed every time I think about being in that old mansion. I can't figure out what was really going on in there. Something was wrong with that other guy, and I don't know what. I'm not sure if he was in on the whole thing, or if he was actually also a victim. I just really hope nobody else falls for whatever I almost went through. I was selling some stuff from my apartment in an effort to clear it out and start fresh with new furniture. At the time, Facebook Marketplace had just become a thing, and I didn't really know all that much about it, or even have a Facebook account to use, so I just used Craigslist. It was the easiest way I knew to get rid of stuff, and maybe it's different where I lived, but around there, everyone used Craigslist. It was a very regular, common thing that I'd rarely heard people having bad experiences from. Even my parents had used it to sell and buy some stuff a while back. Because a lot of the furniture that I was getting rid of was heavy-ish and hard to move by myself, I always mentioned to anyone wanting to buy that they had to come and pick it up. I lived alone and I only had a small car, so I couldn't drag a couch to a meetup location. I didn't mind so much though, because I lived in an apartment complex. There were around 10 other people living in my building, and you would need a key to the complex and to my room if you were to try anything. If I lived in a house, then I probably wouldn't have been letting strangers in. Anyway, I had made plans with a guy named Carson for him to swing by my apartment and pick up the couch. He said he had a pickup truck and could drag it out himself. Plan was for him to get there at 6:30. I think he was just 10 or 15 minutes late when he called and said he was outside. I put my dog, Cleo, in the bedroom to keep her out of the way. Then I headed down and let him into the complex and led him up to my unit. Carson was noticeably a pretty small guy, skinny and almost dirty looking. His hair was medium length and shaggy, and same with his beard. It wasn't what I was expecting at all, because over the phone he confidently said that he could carry the couch out himself. Even over the call, he was much more talkative, and now in person, he was barely talking at all. I didn't mind helping him load it into his truck, but it just felt weird seeing him so differently than he sounded and acted on the phone. We walked into my room and I showed him to the couch. Carson still didn't really talk much or show really any emotion. Honestly, he looked tired and like he didn't even want to be there. After 30 seconds of him staring blankly at the couch, I straight up asked him if he wanted it or not. He stared me in the eyes, really creepily, and nodded his head. But before I could say anything, Cleo started scratching at the bedroom door down the hall. She was a really old dog, almost 14, and was always very quiet and would just sleep all day. Her scratching at the door was really odd and made me think something might be wrong. I said excuse me and quickly hurried down the hall to the bedroom, giving her some pets and making sure she was okay. She was still quietly whining though, like something was wrong. I felt bad, but I closed the door and hurried back to the living room to get this deal over with. But Carson wasn't there. I stood in the middle of the room, almost comically moving my head around, but this guy was gone. He just vanished. Must have ran out of the building during the 20 seconds I was away without saying a word. I poked my head out into the hallway and didn't see him, so I called his phone a couple of times and texted him, but then just closed the door and gave up. Honestly, I thought it was nothing more than just some weird, creepy dude. If anything, I was more weirded out by him coming to my apartment for the couch, yet not really looking at it, and seeming to not even want the couch at all. I went back to Cleo and hung out with her for the next few hours in the bedroom, not stressing too much over the situation, and figuring someone else would want the couch anyway. I wasn't in any sort of rush to get rid of it. I watched TV in bed so Cleo could sleep next to me, and eventually when it was around 11ish, I woke her up to take her outside before bed. It was pretty cold outside. I think it was mid-December, and around here it gets very cold in the winter. I usually wore thin sweatpants inside, but would put on another pair of warmer snow pants over top of them when I had to go outside. So I took my phone out of my pocket and tossed it onto the bed, so that it didn't get stuck in the pocket underneath my snow pants and be uncomfortable and weird. I then put on my jacket and got Cleo's leash, then headed out of the room, through the hallway, and outside to the back of the complex so that she could use the bathroom. It was as I was outside that I'd realized I had forgotten to grab my phone after tossing it on the bed and getting dressed. I just forgot to put it back into my outer pants pocket. I wasn't worried. I was only outside for a couple of minutes. It was just something that I noticed and thought about while I was out there. When Cleo was done, I took her back inside and got back into our unit, then went back to the bedroom and started to take off my winter stuff. That's when I looked at the bed and saw my phone wasn't there. I quickly patted down my pockets to double check, but I was certain I tossed it right there on top of the mattress. And that's when it all clicked. That Carson guy disappearing. He never left. I needed to get out of there immediately. I picked up Cleo, and just before I left the room, I heard a sound from the other end of the apartment. I leaned my body past the doorframe and looked down the hallway. Carson was standing right in the middle of the hall, staring down at me with that same blank, creepy face. "Carson, what the hell are you doing here?" He didn't respond. He stood there unfazed and emotionless, like some sick creature. "Have you been inside here the whole night?" I felt my voice start shaking a bit, but as I said that, I actually started to feel my body fill with rage. I was scared, but also pissed off. I put Cleo down, and the adrenaline sort of just took over. I charged toward him, and he barely even reacted. I pretty much threw him to the ground, and hit him a couple times as he tried to get up. He wasn't a big guy, and I was so full of rage that I was confident enough to attack him like that. Though looking back, if he had had a weapon, he could have just killed me right there. But thankfully, he didn't. He dropped my phone during the commotion though, and I grabbed it and called the cops. He tried to run a few times, but I wouldn't let him. And for the whole fight, and even the 10 minutes that we waited for the police, he still said nothing. The freak really was just a freak. Some sick guy probably planning to do more, but ultimately freezing up and not doing anything. I mean, he stole my phone, and had me pretty much trapped inside the unit with him, with no way to call for help even if I tried hiding in the bedroom. The cops arrested him for trespassing and added on breaking and entering, but because he didn't really do anything else, the guy didn't actually get any jail time. He was let out on bond the next day, and obviously had court hearings and a bunch of other legal stuff, but nothing too serious, I think. I still look back at that event as the closest I'd been to losing my life. I got absurdly lucky that he froze up and didn't have any weapons. If it went any other way, I don't think I'd be here to write this. I was using Craigslist to sell some stuff before a fairly long-distance move. Being a younger female, I definitely tried to be a little more careful with meeting up with random people. I always made sure to meet up in a public area. I never gave anyone my address or went to anyone else's house. For several weeks, I slowly got rid of a bunch of stuff and had nothing but good experiences. This was on a Wednesday night, right after getting out of work at 7. I was texting a stranger that told me his name was Ethan, who was looking to buy one of the full-length mirrors that I had listed. He said he lived an hour away, and so he sent me the location of a gas station that was halfway between us. On maps, it looked like a typical gas station on the side of the road, and was 30 minutes from me. Of course, driving that far right after getting out of work wasn't ideal, but he seemed really interested and was also willing to make the drive, so I would have felt bad to say no. It was already well past sunset when I arrived there. I parked at one of the spaces near the gas pumps and got out. Something felt off though. It was extremely quiet, and nobody else was around. No other cars or people. No one was even driving on the road going past the gas station. And looking at the building, I think the store part was closed. I stood out there for several minutes before getting really unsure about this. Had I known this place was so isolated, I would have never agreed to meet up here. Part of me wanted to leave, but also I'd just driven 30 minutes out here, and I knew Ethan was also driving 30 minutes, and was probably just a few minutes from getting here. So I sort of pushed down the uneasiness and waited. Not too long later, I saw the red pickup truck that Ethan said he would be driving, pulling into the gas station. The windows were heavily tinted, and it was too dark to see much, even when he had parked right next to me. He stayed inside the truck for 30 seconds as I waited, and then he opened the driver's side door and stepped out. When I saw him, blood rushed from my face, and I nearly had a heart attack. Now is a good time to jump back to give context. 2 months ago, shortly before deciding to move away, I had dinner with a guy named John. We met on a dating app, and he seemed like a normal, average guy, so I agreed to dinner. Almost right away, however, I knew things were not going to work out. He was a little weird in person. He was a little bit pushy, and he kept buying me drinks without me asking. And if I said I was okay, or didn't feel like drinking anymore, he'd start subtly trying to guilt trip me. It was very strange and kinda creepy. And because of that odd behavior, I only stayed at the restaurant with him for 40-ish minutes before just cutting it short. But instead of letting me go, he tried to get me to ride home with him, saying I couldn't drive because I'd been drinking. Of course, drinking the drinks that he had been providing to me. The thing was, I didn't even drive there. I had gotten a ride. And so eventually, with him still trying to get me into his car, I went to the restroom and ordered an Uber, then waited for it to arrive before rushing out and right into the car. I never called or texted him after that, and just blocked his number and forgot about it. So 2 months later, when I was alone at that gas station to meet some stranger named Ethan, and saw John step out of the truck, I almost threw up in fear. He didn't even try to hide his intent either. As he walked around the truck toward me, He had this disturbing, unsettling, wide smile across his face, like he was proud of himself for successfully luring me out here and falling into his trap. It was sickening. I hurried back into my car, closing the door just as he got up to my window. He said my name over and over in an eerily calm tone as he grabbed the door handle and tried to open it to get inside. I was very quick to turn my car on and throw it in reverse. It all happened really fast, like just in 10 seconds, and right when my car started to move back, I saw his face shift into anger. He suddenly raised his arm and stabbed the window with something in his fist. It immediately shattered the glass. I think it was a knife, but it was all kind of a blur. I pulled away and floored it down the road. By the time I'd called the police and they got there, John, or whoever he was, wasn't there anymore. And disturbingly, I actually had no way to really know who he was. Both phone numbers, the one I'd blocked 2 months ago, and the other number that he used for Craigslist to text me as Ethan, were prepaid throwaway phones with no direct link to anyone. I still felt the police did an honest investigation, but there just wasn't anything else to do. It's really scary thinking how 2 months had gone by after that single night of meeting him, and he was still after me. He very likely could have been stalking me for that entire time, and I really had no idea at all. How else would he have known about me selling stuff on Craigslist? I think it's really apparent that he had some horrible, disturbing intentions, specifically choosing a faraway, desolate gas station to meet me at, so that we'd be alone, and he could get away with whatever he was going to do. Thankfully, I moved far away soon after that incident. Had I not gotten away, I don't know where I'd be right now. This was a few years ago. I was traveling, driving about 14 hours this day to try and reach Seattle. I didn't pre-book any hotels because, in my experience, they always have open rooms anyway, and sometimes it's better to get to an area you know you will like and then find a hotel while you're there. So I was never too pressed on time. Although this day I did get several alerts about an area I was driving through, getting a pretty big snow and windstorm. I still decided to make the drive, but was cautious and paid attention to the weather changes. Around 5, everything really picked up. Not dangerous feeling yet, but I knew this was supposedly just the beginning. My car felt a little less stable, and over the course of 30 minutes, every other car on the road was gone. It was just me, driving alone through this very small, empty highway, straight through a massive snowstorm. And when the sun went down, I got worried enough that I decided to pull over and find the closest rental to hunker down at for the night. There really wasn't that much around though. Closest towns in either direction were an hour away, and the one motel 15 minutes down the road was closed. The only option I saw was a cabin rental that wasn't too far, and just off the highway. It definitely didn't look like an established place, but if I wanted to stay somewhere, it really was my only option. It was advertised as being fully online, and with it being available for that same night, I decided to book it. I drove not too long down the road, then turned off on a short gravel driveway up to the cabin. The pictures of it online were only of the outside, so I knew it was small, but I really had no clue what to expect of it. I parked, grabbed my small bag, and ran up to the door. The snow hadn't piled up too much yet. I typed the code into one of those key lock holders, then got inside. The place was maybe 200 square feet total, just a single open room that didn't even have a kitchen area. Not that I needed anything more than a bed. But what was strange was that the inside was dirty looking. Not like it had been trashed, but like no one had used, rented, or even been there in months. A thin layer of dust covered everything, and the lighting was very poor, which definitely didn't help it look lively in any way. I set down my things near the bed, and just a couple minutes after getting inside, the snowstorm seemed to get twice as bad outside. I opened the window, and it was so bad that even with the back outdoor light on, I could only see white from the snow flying past the window. It was also pretty cold inside, and the only heater I think the cabin had was a small wood-burning stove in the corner. At least there was already cut-up wood to use, so I got that going, then pretty much just sat on the bed and relaxed. I laid back and let my eyes rest. I must have fallen asleep for an hour or two. I didn't wake up suddenly, but I was aware that something had woken me up. Faintly, I could hear an alarm going off outside. It was muffled by all the wind and creaks of the cabin, but it was noticeable, and when I got up and moved closer to the front door, I realized it was my car alarm. I quickly threw on my coat and hurried outside. I could barely even see my car in the blizzard. Its headlights were blinking, and the alarm was still going. I tried pressing the unlock button as I approached it, but it wouldn't stop the alarm. I assumed this had to have been caused by the heavy winds or something, though when I got up to it and opened the front door, I actually noticed there was snow inside the car. Just a little bit piled up on the front seat, like the door had been left open for a couple of minutes. But the door was shut when I approached it. I suddenly started shifting my head around. I couldn't see very far at all, which is why when I did see someone, it was a genuine jump scare. There was a man standing maybe 10 feet away from me, and near where the trees from the forest started. I couldn't see much of anything except for his outline though, because of the whiteout. I tried to yell at him, but my voice choked up in the cold, and honestly I was terrified, so I ran back to the cabin and got in. Of course, I immediately looked out the windows. Again, almost no visibility outside, but I didn't see him following me. What the hell was that guy doing out here? I knew he had to have gotten into my car somehow and triggered the alarm, so I was really scared of what intentions he might have had. What if he were trying to prevent my car from running, or trap me here in the cabin during the snowstorm? I didn't know, but all of those possibilities really freaked me out. I got my phone and dialed 911. It rang for a couple of seconds, but the call dropped. The storm must have been messing with the signal that was already weak from being out in the middle of nowhere. I called several more times, one time even hearing an operator's voice on the other side, but it cut out again after just a second. I wasn't able to tell them what was going on or give them any information. Then, out of nowhere, my car alarm started going off again. I stood inside the cabin anxiously, knowing there was nothing I could do, and only able to imagine what horrible things could possibly be going on. The alarm went off for several minutes before it cut out. Didn't know if he had turned it off somehow, or if my car had just died or something. 10 more minutes went by. I knew there was no way the guy out there was doing all of this for nothing, so I was really hoping he was breaking into my car just to steal whatever and leave. But then I started to see his figure emerging from the whiteout. He was approaching the cabin. Once he got closer, I moved away from the window. A moment later, I heard his boots hit the porch and go right up to the door. He knocked steadily, like he wasn't in a rush and knew I was stuck there. I didn't move, didn't say anything. I just waited. The man knocked again. Then I heard his boots move across the porch and into the snow. Sounded like he was walking to the side of the cabin, toward where one of the windows was. I moved closer to the wall so he wouldn't be able to see me. His footsteps stopped near the window, and I assume he was looking in. While he was, I started to hear this low sound that I was pretty sure was him humming. He moved from the window and began circling the cabin, all while casually just humming through the snowstorm and walking up to each of the windows. A couple times he even knocked on the windows, but never did he say anything. It was extremely creepy. And then it went quiet. It was hard to tell if his humming faded into the distance or if he had just stopped, but all I heard now was wind. I anxiously waited for a while, and after about 15 minutes, an officer actually showed up to the cabin. I could not even begin to describe the relief I felt when I saw the officer. I guess they had received my calls and didn't get responses from me, but were able to see the location of the call. Because I'd attempted so many times, they sent an officer to do a welfare check. The guy outside the cabin was nowhere around though. The only things still left were his footprints in the snow, going around the cabin and then straight into the woods. He had no car or anything, and he also didn't steal anything from the inside of my car. It seemed like he had done it just to set off the alarm. Nothing about any of it really makes any sense, and of course I didn't stay there any longer. I made it safely to Seattle and haven't stayed in a small remote cabin like that ever since then. I was heading out to a cabin with a good friend, Adam. His family had this place out in the mountains that they used as a vacation cabin, and usually they went there at some point during the winter. But for one reason or another, the rest of his family didn't want to go this year. Since it would be empty, Adam invited me and we thought it'd be chill to have the cabin to ourselves and just hang out. We drove out there together and got to the place at noon. I'd never been there before, so I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. It was a pretty big cabin, not like one of those old tiny ones. This one looked newer and larger. Basically a house, to be honest. Adam had been there multiple times, but this was his first time not going with family, so working everything was kind of a nightmare to figure out. With a few calls to his parents, we were able to get the place functioning and everything up and running though. That night, we didn't do much because we were tired from the 6-hour drive. We went to bed and got up to find the cabin snowed in. Got about 6 inches of snow overnight, and it was still coming down hard. We stayed in, enjoying the cabin and the calmness, and honestly just doing what we'd usually do at home, watching TV, talking, and whatever. At night, we turned on the football game and started drinking a bit. Just a few beers, nothing too crazy. But at some point, we both heard something outside that sounded almost exactly like a man coughing. We both shot our heads up and looked at the front door where we thought we'd heard the sound from. We were both very confused. Adam said there was no way someone else was out here. After a bit of hesitation, I got up and looked, but didn't see anything. The front porch was empty. So ultimately, we both thought we must have heard something else, and joked that we were maybe a little more drunk than we thought, mistaking one of the natural sounds of the woods for being someone coughing. The idea that anyone could be out there where his cabin was, and coughing outside of it, was ridiculous to us, so we forgot about it pretty quickly. Once the game was over, we hung around the fireplace and just had some beers and talked. We stayed up pretty late. I don't even have any idea what time we called it. Adam went to one of the bedrooms and I stayed in the living room. There were a bunch of extra bedrooms, but I sort of just wanted to sleep on the couch next to the fireplace for that unique experience, I guess. And neither of us expected the heavy snow and sudden drop of temperature, and the cabin wasn't really meant to be stayed in during extreme temperatures, so the regular home heater could only keep the place around 60 degrees. The fireplace made that much more bearable. Anyway, I grabbed a blanket and fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, Adam was whispering my name from the hallway. I looked over the couch, completely disoriented and confused. He looked the same as me. "Was that you?" I asked, "Was what me?" He looked a little more concerned, as I told him I'd been sleeping on the couch, not doing anything. Adam told me he swore he heard a door open and close, and he thought I'd left the cabin and went outside for some reason, but clearly I hadn't. He went over to the door and checked it, and it was still locked up. At this point, I thought he was just going crazy, maybe anxious from drinking too much. So I told him to chill and that the cabin was probably just creaking or something. He still looked concerned, like he really did believe what he heard, but agreed that he was probably crazy, and headed back to the bedroom. I laid back down and closed my eyes, though after that I almost felt fully awake. Still, I didn't move or open my eyes for 20 minutes. I kept listening to the wind outside the cabin and the sounds the cabin was making, but everything felt eerie now for some reason. And after those 20 minutes of not being able to clear my head or fall asleep, I opened my eyes and sat up to sort of reset, and I instantly felt a shock go through me. The front door was open, just slightly cracked, but it was fully closed and locked when Adam checked it. I literally couldn't believe it. I got up and walked over. The cold wind shooting through the door made me shiver. I looked out, seeing basically nothing but darkness, then closed the door. I was actually really nervous now and wanted to go tell Adam, but I didn't. I stood there and looked around the cabin for a minute, thinking how this could be possible. Like, were we both just going crazy? And then I heard a thump. It was against the side of the cabin. I moved toward the sound, and it happened again, but much louder. Loud enough to get Adam to leave his room and ask me what that was. I shook my head that I didn't know, and mentioned the door, but the thumps kept hitting the walls of the cabin from outside. Heavy, loud hits against the wood. It was very strange, and it wasn't against a window or the back door. It was just on the wall. There was no way in hell either of us were going outside to see what that was. Not in the dark, and not in the winter storm going on. Both of us went around checking windows and listening, but after a few minutes, it was silent again. It stayed quiet for a half hour as we discussed what the hell we thought was going on. Still, up to this point, neither of us had actually seen a person out there, so our heads were naturally thinking to any other excuse to explain this. But then the thumping started again, hitting the side wall of the cabin near one of the bedrooms. It moved along the wall, not just in one spot. This went on for hours, brief pauses for a bit, only for it to start up again. And through the whole night, we just didn't know what to do. Just before sunrise, it stopped, and didn't start again. When the sun was up, and with the snowfall slowing down, we both put on our jackets and went outside with kitchen knives in hand to look around. All over the outer walls were huge dents, scuffs, and scratches in the wood. It hardly looked natural, or like something someone would do, because it wasn't like they were trying to break in. They were just hitting the wall for some unknown reason. Obviously, that morning, we got the hell out of there, not getting any answers or explanation. And with the door being open in the middle of the night, now feeling a lot less coincidental, we felt very unsafe. It was a really big reality check for us, though, because, of course, now looking back on it, we should have called the cops. We were just young, and in the moment, it was so strange and confusing that we just didn't. I don't know what was happening or who was out in that forest by the cabin, but I think it was clear that they did not want us to be there. I live 20 minutes outside of a small town in a quiet field. It's a small place where not much goes on. This was a week or two after New Year's. It had been snowing on and off, and this night it started snowing quite a lot. I was working in town until 7:30, scheduled until 9, but left early because of how much snow and ice we were supposed to be getting. The roads were empty on the way out to my home, but when I pulled in, I very quickly noticed that there were some tracks in the snow. Tire tracks from a car or truck having driven down my driveway and up to my house. This was very weird, but when I pulled up, no one was there. I headed inside and forgot about it, figuring someone just had the wrong address and probably left as soon as they saw my house. I cooked dinner and stayed in the living room to watch TV for the rest of the night. I'd say just under an hour went by when I noticed a glare coming through the blinds in the window. Living out in the fields, the only lights that could possibly be shining into my home had to be from someone right outside my house, so immediately I was a little on edge. I went up and looked outside, seeing a car pulled up right in my driveway. Its bright headlights were on, and whoever it was seemed to be parked right in the snow, not doing a quick turnaround or anything like that. I thought back to the tire tracks from earlier and thought this was a crazy coincidence. I waited there by the window for a bit, 4 or 5 minutes at least, before the car started to back up, did a 3-point turn, and drove away toward the main road. By then, I was very concerned, because sitting out in my driveway way out here was really strange. It would be hard to accidentally drive down my driveway and then not immediately realize it once you saw my house. And during a winter storm like this, just made it more suspicious. I kept the main windows open enough that I could see through them from the couch, then went back to watching TV, constantly looking over my shoulder at the window. I stayed up for a couple more hours and didn't see anything else outside. I didn't know what to think about the cars showing up at my house, so I just didn't think too much about it, because there really wasn't anything I could do. I closed the blinds, shut everything off, and went down the hall to my bedroom. I stayed up on my phone for another 15 minutes, then passed out. When I woke up, it had to be around 2 a.m. The wind was really heavy outside, shaking the whole house, but it was also eerily quiet. I'm usually a light sleeper, so I do often wake up a lot throughout the night, but this time felt different, though I wasn't immediately aware of why. Sounds crazy, but the atmosphere just felt off, like something had shifted and wasn't quite right. I couldn't pinpoint the feeling though. I decided to get out of bed and look out the window, to check on the storm, but also to try and figure out this feeling I was having. Since this was a one-story house with a side garage, my bedroom window was actually directly in line with the gravel driveway that led from my house to the main road. When I looked out, even though it was dark and snowy, and the headlights were off, I could still see the shape of a car parked right on the driveway. It had a layer of snow already piled over top of it, like it had already been out there for a while, an hour at least. I felt my heart start beating. I backed away from the window, then turned to leave the bedroom to go check that every single door and window was locked. But the moment I faced the bedroom door, I saw something move. A shadow under the door from something. He'd already gotten inside. The thought that he had been waiting for me out in that hallway while I was sleeping for possibly hours was genuinely disturbing. All I could pray for was that he didn't hear me or know that I'd woken up. I got my phone from the nightstand and texted 911 so I didn't have to risk talking out loud. I got a response right away that officers were 18 minutes out, as well as instructions to remain quiet and stay hidden. Every few minutes, I would see his shadow move under the door and hear quiet footsteps pacing out in the hallway. And finally, after waiting the longest 18 minutes of my life, I saw police lights coming down the snowy driveway. Suddenly, the man's footsteps rushed toward the front of the house, but he was too late. The officers got him. Through the next few days, we found out this wasn't some random break-in. He had been watching me for a while, having random pictures taken of me in public and outside of my home. Some of me just sitting on the porch at night, like he was out in the dark field hiding in the pitch black in front of me. I never had any idea of it. And he was just some man I'd never met or seen before. Also, in his car, they found a firearm and what I'll just call a kit, rope and stuff like that. It's fairly obvious what he was going to do had I walked out of my room that night, and I'm very lucky things went the way they did, despite how awful of a situation it was.
I was in Nashville for 4 days in late September, sent there by my company to shadow a regional training conference. I'd been to Nashville once before, years ago, but I didn't know it well. I was staying at a Hampton Inn off Broadway, eating room service the first night because I was tired and didn't feel like navigating a new city alone. The second night, I forced myself out. There's a particular loneliness to traveling solo for work. You're surrounded by people all day in conference rooms, but the evenings drop out from under you. I found a honky-tonk about a block away from the hotel, ordered a beer at the bar, and that's where I met Ryan. He had one of those easy, immediate energies. He introduced himself before I even fully sat down, asked what brought me into town, laughed at the right moments. He was there for work too, he said. Software sales, convention at Upperland Hotel. We talked for 2, maybe 3 hours. Sports, jobs, hometowns, normal stuff. At the end of the night, he suggested we grab dinner the following evening since we were both flying out Friday morning. I said sure. I remembered thinking on the walk back to my hotel, good hang. That was it. Nothing more than that. The next morning, I was grabbing coffee in the hotel lobby before the first session when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around and there was Ryan, overnight bag slung over one shoulder, grinning at me. No way, I said. You're here. He said his hotel had screwed up his reservation, something about double booking, and he had to find somewhere last minute. The Hampton had availability. Wasn't that something? It was something, I agreed. I didn't think much of it at the time. Nashville was packed that week. These things happen. He checked in while I grabbed my coffee, and we rode the elevator together. Discovered we were both on the same floor, room 614 and 618, and laughed about the coincidence. I went to my conference, he went to his. Dinner that night was genuinely fun. We went to a steakhouse he looked up, drank too much bourbon, split a dessert we didn't need. He had a gift for storytelling, self-deprecating, good timing. The kind of guy who made you feel like you'd known him for years. I remember at one point thinking I should introduce him to my friend group back home. He'd fit right in. Walking back, he asked if I wanted to get a nightcap at a hotel bar. I said I was beat, needed to be up by 6 to catch my flight. He was understanding, totally fine, totally normal. I went upstairs, showered, set my alarm, and was asleep by 11. I woke up at 2:47 a.m., and I didn't know why. That disorientation of a hotel room, the unfamiliar ceiling, the aggressive air conditioning, the 2 white curtains. I lay still for a moment, coming back to myself. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow, measured breathing from somewhere in the room that was not me. I have never moved so carefully in my life. I tilted my head 1 degree at a time toward the chair in the corner, the one near the window where I'd thrown my jacket. And in the dark, I could make out a shape, a person, sitting in the chair. perfectly still. I didn't scream. I don't know why. I think my body short-circuited past panic into something colder. Ryan. My voice came out strange, flat, and pause. Hey. His voice was calm, conversational, like we were still at dinner. Sorry. Couldn't sleep. I sat up slowly and turned on the bedside lamp. He was fully dressed, sitting with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. He looked up at me and smiled. That same easy smile. How did you get in here? I said. It wasn't a question so much as a sentence I needed to say out loud to confirm reality. He said the door must not have been latched completely. He said he knocked, but I was asleep. He said he just needed some company, that he sometimes got bad anxiety in hotel rooms. He said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I told him to leave. He didn't move for a long moment. He just looked at me with that smile sitting on his face, like it was painted there. Then he stood up, slowly, and said, "Yeah, okay, sorry man." He walked to the door, pulled it open, and looked back at me once before stepping into the hallway. I got up and threw the deadbolt and the chain. I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the door for probably 20 minutes. I called the front desk. They sent security up. They knocked on 618, got no answer. They told me the room had been checked in under Kevin Dulworth. No Ryan anything. When they pulled up the name I'd given them, Ryan, software sales, Upper Lane Conference, there was no record of any affiliated guest by that description. Security walked me through the camera footage from the hallway outside my room. At 2:31 a.m., a figure approached my door and stood in front of it for 11 seconds. Then the door opened and the figure went inside. The door had latched. I know I had it latched. I remember checking it. What I kept coming back to isn't the chair. It isn't the smile or the lie about the door or the fake name. It's the breathing. He wasn't breathing like someone who couldn't sleep, who was anxious, who had wandered somewhere on impulse. He was breathing the way you breathe when you've been sitting somewhere for a long time and you've gotten completely comfortable, patient, slow, settled. He'd been in that room for a while before I woke up. Long enough to regulate. I don't know what he was waiting for me to do. I don't know what he wanted. I've replayed every conversation from those 2 days, sifted through every detail, and the terrifying answer is that he seemed completely normal right up until he didn't. There was no tell. Nothing that made me think twice. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not Ryan in the chair. The fact I would have never seen it coming. I've gone back and forth about posting this. It's been about 8 months and I still can't explain what we saw. And I'm starting to think I never will. My name's Noah. I'm 23. I live in coastal Georgia, and I grew up about 40 minutes outside of Savannah in a small town that sits along the edge of a tidal marsh. My whole life, people have said that stretch of water is haunted. But the way old people say it, kind of casually, the way you'd say a road has bad luck, you grew up hearing it enough and it stops meaning anything. At least it did for me. It doesn't anymore. Last October, my older brother Nate and his girlfriend Sophia came down to visit for a long weekend. Nate moved to Atlanta for work 3 years ago and doesn't get back much. Sophia had never been to that part of Georgia at all. She kept saying she wanted to see the real South, the quiet parts, not just Savannah's tourist squares and horse-drawn carriages. So on the second night, the three of us drove out to the Marsh Road. There's a pull-off spot about 2 miles past the highway where locals sometimes go to fish at night. It overlooks a wide section of the inlet, and on a clear night, you can see the gas burn off from a refinery about 6 miles across the water. This steady orange glow that floats above the tree line. It sounds ugly, but it's actually kind of beautiful. The water reflects it. We used to come out here as teenagers, just to sit on the tailgate and feel like we were somewhere important. We got there around 10. The air was thick and cool the way October nights get down here. Not cold enough for a jacket, but heavy enough that you could feel it in your lungs. We sat on the hood of Nate's truck and I pointed at the orange glow across the water. Sophia loved it. She started taking pictures. We talked for maybe 30 minutes about nothing in particular. Family stuff. Their apartment in Atlanta. Whether Nate was going to propose. That's when Sophia said, there's someone on the dock. There's an old wooden dock that juts out about 20 feet into the water. Nobody owns it officially. Half the planks are rotten. We used to dare each other to walk out to the end when we were kids. I looked out when Sophia was pointing and I didn't see anything at first. The dock was dark, no lights, just black shapes against the dull reflection of the water. Then I saw it. A person, standing at the very end of the dock, completely still. My first thought was fishermen. That's a reasonable thing. People fish at night, but they weren't holding a rod, and they weren't sitting on the edge. They were just standing, arms at their sides, facing the water, dressed in something dark. We couldn't tell anything from that distance, maybe 40 yards. Nate said I can't tell if it's a man or a woman. Sophia said she thought it was a woman because of the hair, long, hanging straight down. Neither of them seemed that bothered. I was the only one who felt something sink in their chest. I kept watching, and the more I watched, the more wrong it felt. The person didn't move at all. Not to shift their weight, not to raise a hand. Nothing. I've watched plenty of people staring out at water. Everyone moves. You scratch your nose. You roll your shoulders. You adjust. This person was absolutely, perfectly still, like they'd been placed there. We stayed for another 20 minutes. The figure didn't move once. Nate eventually said we should head back. He was only half paying attention by then, scrolling his phone. Sophia had moved to talking about dinner, but I was staring at the dock, and right before Nate reached for his keys, I saw the figure turn its head, not toward us, not toward the water. It turned and looked back over its shoulder, down the dock, toward land, toward the pull-off where we were parked. That's when I saw something I still can't explain cleanly. The profile was clear against the glow of the water, and I'm almost completely certain the head was turned too far. Not dramatically, not movie monster far, just past where a head should stop. A few degrees past natural, like a dial turned slightly beyond its range. Then it stopped off the dock, not into the water, toward us. It moved off the dock onto the bank in one motion and just started walking. Fast. Not running yet, but fast. With that same wrong stillness in the upper body. Arms not swinging. Head locked in one direction. The legs were moving, but everything above the waist was rigid. It covered the distance between the dock and the tree line in seconds. And that's when Sophia made a sound I'd never heard from her before. Not a scream. Something lower. Like the sound left her before she decided to make it. Nate, I said. Just his name. Nothing else. He looked up from his phone, and I saw it coming out of the trees at the edge of the pull-off. And that's when it broke into a full run. And I want to be careful about how I describe this because I know how it sounds. But the run was not right. It was fast. Faster than it should have been for how it moved. But the arms still weren't pumping. They stayed at its sides, slightly behind the body. And the head didn't bounce the way a head does when a person runs. It stayed level, fixed on us the whole time. Nate had the truck running before it even grabbed the door handle. Sophia was already inside. I got in and he floored it onto the road before my door was fully shut. And I grabbed the handle and pulled it closed and looked in the side mirror and it was still coming. Still running. Still that same locked, rigid posture, closing ground at the edge of the headlights. And then the road curved and it was gone. Nobody talked for the first few minutes. Then Sophia said something so quiet I almost didn't hear it. She said, "It didn't make any sound, but it was running on the gravel. Did you notice that? It didn't make any sound." I had noticed. I just didn't let myself think about it yet. Nate said it was a person. Someone messed up. Someone trying to scare people. He said it the way you say something you need to be true. I didn't say anything, because I'd been watching that figure from the moment Sophia spotted it. And I kept coming back to one thing I still can't shake. The 40 yards between the end of the dock and the tree line. 40 yards of open bank. Mud and marsh grass. We would have heard footsteps. We would have heard something crashing through. There was nothing, just silence. And then it was already at the tree line. Already moving toward us like it had already been there. Like the distance had just folded. The drive home was quiet. We ate leftovers. watched something on Netflix, and went to bed. I don't think any of us slept much. 2 weeks later, I mentioned the doc to my mom. Casually, the way you'd mention any story. She got quiet and said, "You went out there at night?" I said, "Yeah, just to show Sophia the view." She didn't say anything for a second. Then she said, "Mrs. Fontenot's daughter went missing from that dock 15 years ago, October. They never found her. They just found her shoes at the end. I didn't know that. I grew up here and I never knew that." I asked her what the daughter looked like. She pulled out her phone and scrolled for a while, then showed me an old photo from a Facebook memorial page. A girl, maybe 19 or 20, long dark hair, straight down. I haven't been back to that road. I don't drive that stretch at night anymore. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed and the house is quiet enough, I think I can hear the marsh, that low, wet sound it makes when the tide shifts. And every time, I have to stop myself from wondering whether something is standing there at the edge of it, still, arms at its sides, waiting to be looked at. My buddy Kyle and I had been running a small cabin on Lake Allatoona for a week. Nothing fancy. A wood-paneled box with a screened porch and a beat-up aluminum fishing boat that came with the property. It was exactly what we wanted. No cell service worth mentioning. No neighbors close enough to bother us. We were both 24, burned out from our respective jobs, and desperately needed nothing to do for 7 days. The first 4 days were perfect. We'd fish in the mornings, drink cold beer on the dock in the afternoons, and play cards on the porch after dark. The lake had maybe a dozen cabins scattered around its edges, but we rarely saw anyone. Just the occasional ski boat cutting across the water in the middle of the day, and then quiet. On the 5th night, we noticed the cabin across the lake had its lights on. This sounded like nothing. It was nothing at first. We'd seen it lit up a couple nights before and assumed it was just another rental. But that night, Kyle mentioned he'd been watching it and thought he'd seen someone standing on their dock earlier. Just standing there, looking out at the water. He pointed it out, not alarmed. Just observational. The way you talk about things when you're a few beers deep and there's nothing else going on. I looked, but by then the dock was empty. The lights in the cabin were on, but nothing was moving that I could see. We forgot about it and went to bed. The next day, Kyle wanted to fish the northern end of the lake, which happened to take us closer to that cabin. I noticed in the daylight it looked different from ours, older, the wood dark and weathered. No car in the gravel lot beside it. A rowboat was pulled up on shore. The dock had a couple of cheap plastic lawn chairs on it, and someone was sitting in one of them as we motored past. I raised my hand in a wave, the way you do with strangers on water, just reflexive, pointless. The person didn't wave back, just watched us go by. I couldn't make out a face at that distance, just a figure in a chair, still as furniture. Friendly, Kyle said, and we laughed it off. That night I couldn't sleep. Sometime around 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and glanced out the window toward the lake without really thinking about it. The water was flat and dark. There was just enough moonlight to see the opposite shore. There were 2 people standing on the other cabin's dock. Not sitting in chairs, standing, side by side, facing our direction. I told myself it was normal. People have insomnia. People stand on their docks at night. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, convinced myself I was being an idiot, and went back to bed. The next morning I told Kyle, and he got quiet in a way that told me he'd been chewing on something too. Turns out he'd woken up around the same time and looked out and seen the same thing, except he'd seen it 20 minutes earlier than I had, which means they'd been standing there for at least that long. We decided without saying it directly to stay off that end of the lake. The day passed fine. We fished, we ate, we tried not to talk about it. But that evening, as the sun was going down and we were sitting on our dock, Kyle grabbed my arm. The rowboat from across the lake was in the water. It was moving. Not fast, not with urgency. Just slowly, steadily, oars dipping in a quiet rhythm. 2 people in it, coming in our direction. My first instinct, and I'm still a little ashamed of this, was still to rationalize. Maybe they were just out on an evening row. Maybe they just wanted to introduce themselves. Kyle, though, was already standing up, and I recognized the look on his face because I'd felt it that morning staring out the window. Something was wrong and his body knew it before his brain caught up. The rowboat was maybe 200 yards out when it stopped. No particular reason. It just stopped, and the two people in it sat there, facing us. We stood on our dock, and they sat in their boat, and nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. Then one of them raised their hand, slow, not a wave exactly, more like an acknowledgement, the deliberate way you'd point something out to someone standing next to you. Kyle said very quietly, "We need to go inside right now." We went inside. I locked the door, which felt absurd. Kyle pulled the curtain across the front window, and then we sat at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for a while. After about 10 minutes, I looked through the curtain. The rowboat was gone. The lake was empty and still. We should have packed up and left that night. Instead, we convinced each other that we were being ridiculous, that two people had rowed across the lake and waved at us, and we turned it into a horror movie in our heads. We laughed about it, nervously, too loudly, but we laughed. I was almost asleep when I heard it. A sound from the porch. Not a big sound, just the soft, specific creak of weight settling onto old wood. The kind of sound the porch made when you stepped onto it from the steps. I lay completely still. My heart was doing something terrible in my chest. The creak came again. Slow, deliberate, moving toward the front door. Then it stopped. I don't know how long I lay there after that. Long enough that my body started to convince me I imagined it, that it was an animal, that old wood settles and makes sounds for no reason. I never got up to check. I've thought about that a lot since. That I just laid there with my eyes open in the dark, listening to absolutely nothing, and didn't move until sunrise. In the morning, Kyle found the two plastic chairs from across the lake sitting on our porch, side by side, facing the front door. We were packed and on the road within 20 minutes. We haven't really talked about it since. I don't have an explanation for what those people wanted. I don't know how they got onto our porch without us hearing the door, or why they left those chairs, or whether they were watching us the whole week. What I keep coming back to is the moment in the rowboat, one of them raising their hand, because it didn't feel like a greeting. It felt like they were showing us something, like they were saying, "We see you in there." Like they wanted us to understand, before anything else, that they had been watching us for a very long time. I've been putting off writing this for about 3 months now. I kept telling myself I was waiting until I felt ready, but I don't think I'm ever going to feel ready. So here it is. This goes back to the summer before my sophomore year of high school, when my friend Dara invited a small group of us to her grandmother's lake house in northern Wisconsin. There were 4 of us. Me, Dara, a girl named Simon who'd I'd known since the 4th grade, and a quieter girl named Claire who moved to our school the previous fall. We weren't all equally close. Dara and I were best friends. Simon and I got along well, and Claire was sort of a recent addition to our circle. Friendly enough, a little hard to read. Dara liked her, so we all went along with it. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. Claire was not strange in any obvious way. She didn't set off alarm bells. She was soft-spoken and a little spacey, the kind of person you describe as an old soul. She had this habit of staring out windows for long stretches that I always chalked up to her being an artistic type. She painted. She talked about painting constantly. That should have been my first hint that I had no idea what kind of art she was actually making. The lake house was gorgeous and old, the kind of place that crackles and settles at night in ways that sound almost intentional. We slept in a long upstairs room with 4 cots lined up near the windows. The lake was visible from there, a flat black mirror after dark. The whole place had a timeless quality, like nothing outside of the property really existed. By the end of the first day, I had already forgotten what day of the week it was. I think that's just what places like that do to you. The first odd thing happened on the second night. I've always been a light sleeper in unfamiliar places. My mom used to joke that I could hear a house thinking, so it didn't surprise me much when I opened my eyes sometime after 2 with no particular reason for it. I just opened my eyes. The room was still dark and I could hear the other 3 breathing in different rhythms. I lay there for a few minutes and was almost back under when I noticed Claire's cot was empty. I figured she was using the bathroom down the hall. A minute passed, then 5. I told myself to go back to sleep. I don't know why I didn't. Instead, I got up and walked to the top of the stairs. The kitchen light was on. Claire was standing at the table with her back to me, completely still, not doing anything. No glass of water in front of her, no snack, just standing there in the dark on the other side of that light. I watched her for what felt like a full minute before I crept back to bed without saying a word. I convinced myself she was sleepwalking. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. The following afternoon, I couldn't find my journal. I'd kept one since I was 12 and brought it everywhere. Wrote in it every day without fail. I tore through my bag twice. Dara helped me look. Claire suggested I might have left it in the car without meeting my eyes when she said it. I remember that detail clearly, though I didn't think much of it at the time. We spent that afternoon on a kayak tour around the lake, and I forgot about the journal until we were eating dinner. By then, I was just relieved to stop thinking about it. I'd find it eventually. That night I fell asleep before everyone else. I woke again around 3, same as before, and this time I heard something, soft and rhythmic, coming from the direction of the cots. I tilted my head slowly and let my eyes adjust. Claire was sitting upright in her cot with her back to me. Her arms were moving in a slow, repeated motion. She was drawing. I didn't say anything. I watched until I felt my heart beating in my ears, and then I deliberately slowed my breathing and closed my eyes. It was 20 minutes before I heard her lie back down. I did not sleep again. The last full day, the 3 of us went into town. Claire said she wasn't feeling well and stayed behind. We were gone for most of the afternoon, and when we got back, Dara's grandmother pulled me aside and told me Claire had spent the entire time upstairs. Hadn't come down once, hadn't eaten, hadn't said a word to her. There was nothing alarming about that on its own. Her grandmother's tone made me uneasy, as if she was hinting at something more. I couldn't let it go after that. I waited until the others went down to the dock at sunset and went upstairs and opened Claire's suitcase. There was a sketchbook at the bottom, tucked under folded clothes. My journal was in there with it. So were 2 photographs, the kind printed from a phone, of me asleep. In both of them, my face was close to the camera. My expression was slack, and the lighting had the particular flatness of a phone flashlight turned low. Someone had been standing over me while I slept and photographing my face. I opened the sketchbook. I want to be precise here, because precision is important. It wasn't violent. That would have been easier to categorize. It was portraits. Page after page of portraits. All of me. All extraordinarily detailed. I'm not an artist, and even I could tell they were technically accomplished. But the detail wasn't what bothered me. It was the expression she'd given me, in every single one. My face rendered over and over again. Always wearing an expression I couldn't quite name. Not afraid, not angry. It just looked like I was waiting for something, like I knew something was coming and had already accepted it. The last drawing was different from the others. It was from behind, me sitting at a table, in this house, from the vantage point of the doorway. The table was set for 1, outside the window in the drawing, where the lake should have been. She had drawn nothing, just blank white space where the water was supposed to be. Underneath it, in handwriting I recognized from past notes in class, she had written my full name, first and last, and underneath that, I have been waiting for this. I stood there for a moment too long. I should have put the sketchbook down and walked away immediately, but my hands weren't cooperating. I was still holding it when I heard the stairs creak. I don't know how long she'd been there. Her expression didn't change when our eyes met. No surprise, no embarrassment, no alarm. She just looked at me with that same quiet, patient stillness she always had, the one I'd always read as thoughtfulness. I understood it differently now. She glanced at the sketchbook in my hands, then back at my face, and something shifted almost imperceptibly at the corners of her mouth. Not a smile exactly, something that came before a smile. Neither of us said anything. I became acutely aware of how far I was standing from the door and how close she was to it. I was looking for my journal, I finally said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I know, she said. That was it. That was all she said. Then she stepped aside from the doorway, leaving it open, and walking slowly back down the hall toward the bathroom. I listened to the footsteps until I heard the click of the door. I put the sketchbook back, picked up my journal, and went downstairs without looking back. I told Dara privately. Dara's grandmother was on the phone with Claire's mother within the hour. We were on the road before it was fully dark. Dara told me later that Claire had apparently become fixated on a different girl the previous year, before she moved to our school. She didn't have the details, and I didn't push for them. I avoided Claire for the rest of high school. I thought about Claire occasionally, the way you think about things that scared you when you were young, distantly, almost nostalgically. Then 3 months ago, I got a follow request from an account with no username, just a string of numbers. The profile photo was black, no posts, 11 following. When I clicked on the following list to see if I recognized anyone, the first account on it was mine. I declined the request. The account disappeared by the next morning. I've made my profile private since then. I don't know if it was her. I don't know how I'd ever know. I'm writing this partly to have a record of everything and partly because putting it into words makes it feel more real. And for some reason, right now, I need it to feel real. I keep coming back to that drawing. The window. The white space where the lake should have been. I think about what it means to be observed by someone before you know you're being observed. The portrait already finished before you sat down to be painted. I don't have a way to end this. I'm just going to stop here. My family has a tradition that sounds stupid until you're the one doing it. Every Thanksgiving, we rent a property somewhere remote. A farm, a lake house, whatever my Uncle Dale can find on short notice. And we spend 4 days doing absolutely nothing productive. No phones at dinner, no talking about work, no leaving early. It sounds peaceful. It isn't. There are 10 of us when everyone shows up, and we are not a peaceful family. This particular year, Dale found a working orchard in rural Pennsylvania. Not a farm stay, not a bed and breakfast, an actual working orchard that the owners rented out in the off-season for extra money. About 40 acres of apple trees arranged in long, perfect rows, a main farmhouse that smelled like wood polish and old rugs, and one smaller guest cottage positioned maybe 100 yards away from the property's eastern edge. The nearest town was a 20-minute drive down a road that was really just 2 tire tracks pressed into the gravel. It was the kind of place that looked beautiful in photographs and slightly wrong in person. The trees were too uniform. The rows went back further than you could see. We arrived Wednesday evening. 10 people across 3 cars, and immediately did what my family always does. Claimed sleeping spots, argued about who got which bathroom, and started drinking. My cousins Petra and Wes set up a card table in the kitchen before the luggage was even inside. My grandmother installed herself in the armchair closet to the fireplace and did not move from it for the next 12 hours. I'm 23, youngest adult in the family by 4 years, which means I spend most of these trips floating between conversations, not fully belonging in any of them. I wandered outside around 10 the first night just to get some quiet. And that's when I noticed a light. It was moving between the trees. Just a soft white glow, low to the ground, moving in a direction that didn't make sense for an animal. Too steady, too deliberate. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds before it winked out. And I went inside and didn't say anything because it was probably a reflection or a neighbor with a flashlight. And I didn't want to be the person who ruined Thanksgiving by being paranoid about a light. Thursday was fine. Thursday was great, actually. We ate too much. Dale deep-fried a turkey in the driveway and nearly took his eyebrow off. My mom cried twice, once happy and once not, which is her personal record for the holiday. We went to bed late and full, and I slept without dreaming. Friday is when things started to feel off. It was small at first. My cousin Petra mentioned at breakfast that she heard footsteps on the cottage porch around 3 in the morning. She assumed it was Wes coming back from the main house, but when she asked him about it, he said he hadn't been asleep since midnight. They both laughed it off. Old buildings, probably. Pipes. We were in the country. There were animals. Then Dale found the gate to the orchard standing open. He was certain he latched it the night before because he'd specifically gone out to do it after reading something in the rental agreement about liability. He latched it again. By afternoon, it was open again. That evening, I walked to the guest cottage to return a phone charger I borrowed from my Aunt Riva and noticed something I couldn't immediately explain. The motion sensor light above the cottage door, the one triggered by steps on the porch, was on. But the porch was empty. I stood there looking at it for a moment, and then I looked out at the orchard, and the rows of trees looked back at me, perfectly still, perfectly dark. I started doing something I'm not proud of. Every time we gathered for a meal, I counted heads, 10. I kept counting to make sure we were at 10. I don't know exactly when I started doing it or why, but by Friday dinner, I was doing it compulsively, touching each chair back as people settled in like I was taking inventory. 9. I counted again. 9. I walked through the main house looking for whoever was missing and found my cousin Marcus in the bathroom and felt my shoulders drop about 4 inches. 10. I was losing it. I laughed at myself quietly and sat down and poured myself a glass of wine. After dinner, Dale brought up the gate again, and this time his voice had lost the humor it carried at breakfast. He said he found footprints on the other side of it, boot prints, adult-sized, leading in from the road and then tracking along the outside edge of the orchard toward the house. He followed them until they disappeared into the grass near the guest parking area. Nobody said much. My grandmother said it was probably just a local cutting the property, which was a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I wanted to believe it. But I kept thinking about the motion sensor light. I kept thinking about how the boot prints had gone toward the house and not away from it. I volunteered for the pull-out sofa that night so Reva and her husband could have the bedroom. This put me in the main living room, 8 feet from the door, and I lay there for a long time listening to the house settle and the wind move through the orchard and trying very hard to sleep. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. for no reason I could identify. The fire was down to embers, the room was dark, and there was someone standing outside the front window. I could see the outline of the head and the shoulders in the glass, backlit by nothing, just slightly darker than the darkness behind it. I didn't move. I could not make myself move. I watched the shape for what felt like 3 or 4 minutes, perfectly still, and I tried to convince myself it was a tree branch or a shadow, or my own tired brain manufacturing a threat. And then the shape turned its head, very slowly, and looked directly at the window. I screamed. I'm not ashamed of it. I screamed and hit the lamp and woke up the entire house in about 6 seconds. Dale came downstairs with a flashlight and his hunting knife, and when he opened the front door, there was nobody there. But the motion sensor above the door was on, and in the flower bed beneath the front window, in the soil that had thawed slightly during the day, there were 2 boot prints facing the glass. Fresh, deep, like someone had been standing there for a long time. We spent the rest of the night in shifts. Lights on, doors locked. All 10 of us accounted for and awake and not saying much. West called the non-emergency police line, and an officer came out at 6 a.m. and walked the perimeter and said he'd drive through the area more often. But there's nothing he could charge anyone with. We left Sunday morning. Full day early. 10 people, 3 cars. I counted everyone into their vehicles before we pulled out, standing in the gravel driveway with the orchard at my back, not turning around. The rental company refunded us half the stay without us even asking, which I didn't find comforting. It suggested this happened before. It suggested they already had a policy for it. I've thought about those boot prints every day since. How deep they were, how still whoever made them must have been standing while we were asleep inside, while I was 8 feet away from the other side of the thin glass. I've thought about how they were facing in, not walking, not leaving, just standing there, watching in the dark between the trees. I filed it away as something I'd never fully understand and tried to move on. That lasted about 3 weeks. That's when my Aunt Reva called me, her voice doing something I never heard it do before, going very quiet and very flat at the same time. The way people talk when they're trying not to panic out loud. She said the police had contacted her, not about the orchard, about her ex-husband, a man named Gary who she left 8 years ago and never talked about, not once in all the years I'd known her. Apparently Gary had been picked up at a traffic stop about 2 counties over from that property. 2 days after we left, there was a knife in his glove box. There was also a handwritten list. She wouldn't tell me everything on it, but she told me enough. Our names were on it. All 10 of us. Hers was circled. I want to start by saying Dana and I talk about it sometimes, even now. Not often, maybe once or twice a year, usually in February, when the cold gets a specific kind of gray and the trees go skeletal again. We'll be sitting somewhere ordinary, her kitchen table, my car in the parking lot, and one of us will say, that winter, and we both know exactly which one. We were 23, both of us working dead-end jobs in a town that felt like it exhaled everything interesting about itself years before we arrived. Dana was a substitute teacher. I was doing inventory at a hardware store. We'd been best friends since college and ended up in the same nowhere place people sometimes do, pulled by cheap rent and inertia. The trail was her idea. She'd read about it in some local outdoors blog. This converted railroad corridor through the woods outside of town. Old trestle bridge over a creek. Good for photos, the blog said. It was a Monday in February, and we both had the day off. And the sky was that pale, washed-out blue that makes you feel guilty for staying inside. I don't know why I remember pulling into the parking area so clearly. Dana was already out of my car before I had the key out, hiking boots crunching the frozen gravel, her breath coming out in little clouds. The trail was beautiful in a desolate way, bare hardwoods on either side, ground frozen solid, sound muffled except for our voices and the occasional bird. We talked about everything and nothing. Her students, a guy I'd been seeing who never texted back, what we were going to do with our lives. The kind of conversation that fills the lungs. The bridge appeared gradually through the trees. Old iron trestle, maybe 150 feet across, spanning the creek below. The wood planking between the rails was weathered and there were gaps, and you could see the frozen creek 30 or 40 feet down. It looked like a photograph. Dana had her phone out before we even reached it. We crossed slowly, stopping in the middle. The wind came through the valley hard and direct, and I remember zipping my jacket higher. Below us, the creek ice had that blue-green color of deep cold. I took some pictures too. I texted one to my mom. She replied with the heart emoji. I don't know exactly when I noticed him. That's the thing I've come back to so many times. In the dark. In therapy once for about 6 months. There's no clean moment. It was just suddenly there, on the near end of the bridge. The end we'd come from. Standing at the point where the trestle met the trail. He hadn't been there when we crossed. Or maybe he had and we didn't look back. He was an ordinary looking man. That's what I always land on. Medium height, medium aged, wearing a dark jacket. He had his hands in his pockets. He was looking at us. People hike trails. People cross bridges. I told myself this immediately, automatically. The way your brain reaches for the explanation that lets you stay calm. But he didn't cross. He just stood there. Something about the stillness of him. The way he wasn't fidgeting. Wasn't checking his phone. Wasn't doing the things a person does when they're simply waiting. Something about that stillness pressed against inside my chest like a thumb. Dana, I said. Yeah, she said. She'd already seen him. We were in the middle of the bridge. To get back to the parking area, we had to go toward him. The other direction led deeper into the woods. No trail on the far bank that I remembered. Just tree line and frozen slope. I think about the math of the moment more than anything else. The geometry of it. How a position that feels like the middle of nowhere is really just a coordinate. And how coordinates can be reached from multiple directions. Let's keep going, Dana said. Her voice was careful, and even in a way that meant she was working to keep it that way. She meant keep going forward, toward him, to the bank, to the trail, to the parking lot. We started walking. My footsteps on the planking sounded enormous. The gaps between the boards showed the creek below. I kept my eyes forward. He hadn't moved. We were maybe 40 feet from him when he took his hands out of his pockets. Nothing was in them. That registered some relief. Nothing in his hands. But the gesture itself was wrong. Too deliberate. Like something that had been rehearsed. His eyes hadn't moved from us the entire time. Then the sound of a vehicle somewhere on the road above the near bank. An engine cutting off. A truck door slamming. That specific hollow metal bang that carries through the cold air. And then voices. 2 or 3 of them. Loud and relaxed. The way people are when they just arrived somewhere and hadn't settled into quiet yet. It was nothing. Just other hikers showing up. Ordinary people on an ordinary afternoon. But the sound changed something in the air. The men looked up toward the road, just for a second, and then he stepped off the bridge onto the bank and turned and walked back up the trail. We walked off that bridge fast, not running. Neither of us ran. It felt important not to run, like running would confirm something we couldn't take back. We reached the bank and turned up the trail after him. He was maybe 200 feet ahead of us, walking at a normal pace. He never looked back. In the parking lot, the man crossed to a dark car on the far end of the lot, one that had been sitting in the corner away from the others the whole time, and he got in and drove away. A beat-up pickup truck was pulling in as he left. 3 people climbing out, already laughing about something. A dog jumping down from the truck bed. They had no idea. They never would. Dana and I sat in the car for a long time without speaking. I kept thinking about the timing of it, the way the truck door had slammed the exact moment it did. If they had stopped for gas on the way or left 5 minutes later, we would still have been on that bridge. Just the three of us in the wind and the creek below. No witnesses. No reason for him to stop whatever he had been about to do. I don't use the word about to lightly. I've thought about it long enough to mean it. He wasn't passing through. He wasn't there to enjoy the trail. He had positioned himself at the only way off that bridge. It had taken his hands out of his pockets, and he'd been waiting for us to close the last 30 feet. The noise from the road didn't interrupt him. I think it's the only reason we're here. We should go, Dana finally said. Yeah, I said. I started the car. We never reported it. There was nothing to report. A man stood on a bridge and looked at us. That's all that happened, technically. We told ourselves this the whole drive home. We told ourselves this for months. I told myself this for years. Right up until I was scrolling the news one October evening and saw a face I recognized above a headline, and the room went very quiet around me, and I sat there for a long time before I called Dana. The headline said he'd been arrested, that he'd lived in town for years, that he worked at a pharmacy technician. The kind of ordinary job, the kind of ordinary place that means someone probably handed him their prescriptions and made small talk and never thought twice that two women who had gone out for a walk together and never come home were connected to him, that he had been there all along, embedded in the daily life of that community the whole time. She already knew. She'd seen it an hour before. It was him, she said. I know, I said. We didn't say anything else for a while. Outside my window, the October trees were going dark and bare. I thought about the bridge, the creek below it, the blue of the ice. I thought about the van door opening and adults laughing, the sound of it traveling through the cold air at exactly the right moment. I still think about that sometimes. The accident of timing, the absolute randomness of it. That if that truck hadn't pulled in when it did, I don't think Dana and I would be here. Dana and I still talk. We still get together, but every February, without fail, we call each other. We don't always have much to say. Sometimes we just let the line stay open for a while, both of us quiet on opposite ends, just making sure the other one is still there.
I was camping for 5 days alone in a lesser-known national forest in southeast Utah. I was a very frequent camper, and while I'd never been to this exact spot, I had camped in areas around there before. The first 3 days were pretty standard. No one else showed up, and I spent the days hanging around the campsite, reading, cooking, and walking around. On the third night, I had a nice, calm campfire going, and was trying to stargaze, because the sky was clear, when, all of a sudden, the silence was interrupted. It sounded like a man screaming at the top of his lungs in the distance. It sent a chill through me and made me freeze up for a moment, before standing and looking in the direction it came from. But it was way too dark out to see anything beyond the campfire. The scream sounded far away, but not far away enough to feel safe about it. Like it was maybe a half-mile out in the forest, kind of toward where I knew the small lake was that was around here. The strangest thing about it, though, was that was it. It was just that one scream. It remained silent for the rest of the night. Before going to sleep, I came to the conclusion that it had to be a mountain lion. If you didn't know, mountain lions can sometimes make these disturbing screeching sounds at night that often mimic that of human screams. Not exactly, but if you don't listen too carefully, you might mistake it for one. Figuring, since I'd only heard it once, and couldn't really confirm what I'd heard, that's what it had to be. Although, in the back of my head, I knew it sounded different. I'm pretty sure I was just coping to make myself feel better and not get too unnerved. I fell asleep and slept through the night without any disturbances. When I got up, I hung around the campsite for a little bit, before deciding to go for a walk. By then, I'd fully convinced myself there was no real danger to whatever I heard last night, So I thought I'd walk to the lake to see if I could figure out what it was. Maybe find some mountain lion paw prints or something. Almost right when I got there, I could clearly see something had disrupted the sand on the other side of the lake. I walked around the border. In the sand was a bunch of random stuff scattered all over. Bags, food wrappers, and just a bunch of junk. Everything was oddly in almost a perfect line though, following this hollow divot in the sand, like something had been dragged through the sand and the loose items fell out. And this dragging streak ended right up at the edge of the water. I looked out at the lake, knowing there was no way I'd see anything. The water was calm and still, no ripples or waves. It gave me an eerie, uneasy feeling. I left and walked quickly back to my campsite, nervously checking my surroundings the whole way back. I felt better, or safer I guess, once I was back near my tent. I really didn't know what to make of everything, but in my head I thought it was best not to think about it too hard and risk getting paranoid. That would only make things worse. So I distracted myself with making lunch and thinking about other things. I refueled the campfire before it got dark and sat around it. About an hour into the night though, I realized I had forgotten to collect a stash of sticks to keep the fire going with. So I got up and walked the perimeter of my campsite, grabbing any small, dry sticks off the ground. And that's when I heard a voice. A quiet whisper from the dark just ahead of me. I didn't have a flashlight on me, and it was pitch dark out there. And the voice was quick and quiet, not long enough for me to know exactly where it came from or even what they said. It didn't feel like they were talking to me though. I got a little spooked and ran back to the campfire. As the minutes passed, I tried to reason with myself that it couldn't have been a person, that the wind had just made a strange whisper-like sound. But when I remembered the scream from last night, I could no longer convince myself with all of these excuses that I was safe. Someone was out there, watching my campsite. I stayed outside by the fire for another hour, trying to think over my options of what to do, although really there were only two real options. Stay and hope whoever is out there leaves me alone until morning, or leave in the middle of the night. At the time, leaving in the middle of the night seemed like a worse idea, allowing the person to follow or get close to me without me being able to see them, and leaving myself completely vulnerable. So if they really did have bad intentions, I'd only be helping them by walking out into the dark. But when I went out to collect sticks earlier, I didn't get enough to last before hearing the whisper and running back, and now the fire was getting lower. I got up and walked to the edge of the light, beginning to reach down and get more sticks. I got maybe another hour worth of wood before I heard that voice again. This time, I had been smart enough to bring my flashlight with me, so I quickly shined it in the direction of the voice. It was very underwhelming though. The light was almost useless, not reaching far and not brightening the area as much as I thought it would. After a few seconds, I got scared again and ran back to the campfire. I tossed the sticks in the fire and made sure it stayed lit. The nerves kept building. I was genuinely fearing for my life and trying to keep it together. I mean, by this point, I'd put together the scream, the scattered items, and the drag marks by the lake, and now the voices outside of my camp. I got increasingly tired, but I didn't let my eyes rest for even a moment. I stayed up, and every hour I had to walk the border and get more wood for the campfire. And almost every time, I'd hear voices out in the dark. I counted 3 or 4 distinct voices, softly whispering back and forth, like they were alerting each other of what I was doing. It was very unsettling. The last 2 hours of the night, though, When I went out, I didn't hear anything. And finally, when the sun came up and I could see, no one was out there. I packed and hurried down the trail. The trail went in the same general direction as where the voices came from, so I stayed alert. And I found several scattered footprints in the dirt around the area, but I have no way to know if it was from the people I was hearing last night, or if it was from the man I'd heard screaming, or even just other hikers from previous days. I made it out, and honestly, I don't have any answers for what was happening in those woods. I never heard of any news or missing people since then. I couldn't find any publicly available connections to what I'd experienced. This was about a year ago, on my first time camping not at a designated tent campground. I still considered myself a fairly experienced camper because I did everything any other camper would do. The only difference is I didn't have to hike out to anywhere, and there would usually be a lot more people around. Some people would have their whole elaborate campsite set up with tables and everything, but I always kept it minimal. Eventually, I got the urge to go camp somewhere on my own, not around a ton of people, and get to experience more of the quiet nature side of camping. The trail I chose was 2 hours long. There weren't too many pictures, but I thought it seemed good enough. I started the hike a few hours after the sun came up in the morning. The parking lot was empty, though it wasn't much of a parking lot at all, more like a small dirt area off the road. Everything went well for the first little bit. It was honestly just a regular hike into the woods. But about 30 minutes into the hike, I saw a man on the trail ahead of me. He was far down, moving through the trees, but after just a minute, I'd basically caught up to him. This guy was walking incredibly slow. I'm not trying to say that in a mean way, but more so like the guy was purposefully walking astronomically slow. Usually, I wouldn't want to pass anyone going in the same direction, and would instead just take a breather and walk slower myself to let them get further ahead. But he was going so slow that I kinda had no choice but to pass him. I casually said hello as I started to walk around him, but when I got next to him, he suddenly started walking at a normal pace, matching my speed and asking me how my day was going. I looked over, really confused at first at how weird this was, but then the guy reached out his hand for a handshake and said his name was Oscar. I shook his hand, and we started a conversation. I wasn't opposed to talking to anyone, but it was just the way in which it started that made me feel off about the whole thing, at least at first. Once we were talking, though, Oscar seemed like a normal, chill guy. We talked for the next 30 minutes. I noticed he didn't have a backpack and asked why, and he said he was actually already set up and was just going for a walk at the moment. He said he had made his campsite in the trees, a little ways past the technical spot for camping, where I was headed. And at some point I mentioned that I was newish to this type of camping. Oscar said he'd been to this place a bunch of times, and that it was perfect for a newcomer, and if I wanted, I could come by his campsite later and have dinner around his campfire. I agreed, thinking it'd be cool and could be a great way to make a new camping friend. When we got to the campground, I started setting up my stuff, and Oscar continued walking into the trees to his campsite. I couldn't see it from where I was set up at, but I assumed it was just a few minutes further into the forest. The rest of the day, about 5 or 6 hours, I was alone at the campground enjoying the quiet forest. No signs of Oscar or any other campers or hikers coming up to the campground. It wasn't until the sun started going down that Oscar came out of the trees and walked up to my camp area. He asked me how everything was going, and we talked for a few minutes. Then he asked if I wanted to come chill at his campfire and have something to eat. I said sure, and followed him away from my tent and into the trees. I did have a feeling in the back of my head that this was a bit strange, knowing I'd just met this guy and was now following him deeper into the forest, but I felt like I would have been able to read if he was a weird guy. Aside from the slow walking situation, he didn't seem weird at all. I walked behind him for about 5 minutes, getting much deeper into the woods than I was expecting, before I could see his campfire glowing through the trees. We went up to it, and something immediately put me off. Oscar wasn't alone. There were 2 other guys sitting at the campsite around the fire. He had never mentioned them. Not that I had asked, but I thought it was really weird he never brought it up, especially after inviting me over. They all greeted me though, and now I was already too far in to bring it up or to leave without making things uncomfortable. So I sat down next to all of them. The men weren't cooking anything fancy, just some packets of ramen, boiling the water over the fire. The first few minutes were fine. We all just talked, the casual small talk. But after that, things got quiet. Oscar was the one boiling the water and cooking the ramen, and the rest of us were just sitting there. The forest also had gotten quiet, and dark as well. It was like the forest was telling me something was wrong. Every time I would look up at the men, their eyes would shift away from me, like I'd caught them watching. Hey, I'm gonna head back to my camp to grab something from my bag. Save me a bowl though. I'll be right back. I said it in the most casual way possible to not make it too obvious I was trying to leave and not come back. Oscar didn't even look up. He just continued poking the fire and boiling the water like I hadn't said anything. The other 2 men didn't say a word either. They just looked at me. After a very uncomfortable, tense few seconds, I turned around and started to walk away. I only made it a few steps before the eerie silence was interrupted by the men shifting behind me. I looked back over my shoulder. The 2 men were now standing, looking right at me. Oscar still didn't look up. I didn't look for too long before continuing to walk away. The next minute, as I was walking further away, I had this horrible, dreadful feeling lurking behind me, and I wanted to look, but I was scared. Once I got far enough, the feeling was too much for me to handle, and I finally did turn around again. I was far from their campsite now, but the fire glowing through the forest was still visible, and I could see the logs we were sitting on. But all 3 men were gone. I made a dead sprint back to the campground where my tent was. When I made it, I started to take everything down, but the paranoia of not knowing where the men went, and possibly being out in the dark somewhere, jumping out at any minute, made me abandon the campsite and just run. I followed the trail, not stopping until I got all the way back to where I'd parked. As I drove out, I called the police. I had no real evidence to prove the men were up to something, but I still wanted the police to investigate. They drove down to the trail, and while they didn't go down to the campsite, the officers did confirm no other cars were parked anywhere. Those men had not driven there, and there was no way to know how long they were out there for. I can't say exactly what those men intended, but I think when everything is put all together, to me, it's clear that something really awful was planned for me that night. This was around 2015. I had a young, very active retriever mix named Sammy. We did tons of camping and road trips together. This trip wasn't one of our bigger ones, though. It was to a forest just an hour away at a campsite I'd been to a lot. It was my comfort spot, where me and Sammy could go to just be alone and relax without needing to drive very far, or do too much planning ahead. We left in the morning and got to the campsite around 2 p.m. As soon as we were set up and ready to relax, I quickly noticed Sammy was acting different. She was very familiar with this spot and was always excited and energetic when we got there, but for some reason she wasn't this time. She looked on edge, like she could sense something nearby. I looked around and saw nothing. The forest was quiet and completely dead. A good 30 minutes went by before she suddenly relaxed a little and went back to being her typical self, running around and just having a good time being a dog. One thing about Sammy is she has always been extremely protective, so I assumed she might have smelled or heard an animal nearby and went into guard mode. Anyway, I made us some food and we hung around doing nothing for a few hours. Sammy went exploring a little bit and played with sticks while I built a campfire and rested. When the sun got lower, I stocked up on firewood and got the fire going a bit heavier to lighten up the area. Everything was very quiet and calm. Sammy was laying right next to me, and we were both watching the fire when I heard something ahead of us. I looked up, barely seeing something shift near the trees, and suddenly Sammy completely lost control and bolted toward it, barking and growling. I jumped up and yelled at her, but she was dead set on chasing them. I ran after her. The sun wasn't fully down yet, but shadows covered everything and made it very difficult to navigate or see anything really well. After just a few seconds, I could hardly see her, and after 30 seconds, her barks started to fade out, and within a minute, she was gone. I barely had any time to even process what happened. I didn't know what it was that I saw, whether it was a person or an animal, or something else. I kept running in the direction she went though, hoping she'd lose focus on whatever or whoever it was she was chasing. I was confident she could navigate her way back to me just through my scent, but I was more scared of her actually catching up to something she couldn't handle. And my concern grew as the minutes passed by, and the forest grew even darker and quieter. The sun was basically fully set now, and I didn't have a chance to grab anything when I chased after her. So I had to make the difficult decision to go back to the camp before I got myself lost, and to grab a flashlight and do this the smart way. I really hoped she would just run back, but I also couldn't just sit there and anxiously wait for her, knowing she could be in trouble. I got a light and retraced my steps back into the forest. I called out her name over and over, hearing my voice echo through the trees. I never even heard the slightest bark. I was out there for over an hour. I didn't venture too far from the camp, staying within a mile in the area that I was familiar with, enough to be confident that I wouldn't get lost. And then my light picked up something small on the ground, reflecting back at me. I walked up closer. It was Sammy's dog tag on her collar, laying in the grass. It looked like it had been ripped off of her. Of course, I quickly began thinking the worst, but just a moment later, I moved my light around the area and found Sammy laying down near a tree. She was alive and okay, but shaking and terrified. She wouldn't even move. I had to pick her up and carry her the first quarter mile before she was even willing to walk. Something happened out there, and I was terrified to find out what. I was just thankful she was alive and okay. And the plan was, as soon as we got back to the camp, to pack everything up and leave right in the middle of the night for both of our safeties. Sammy walked close up next to me as we navigated through the dark and finally could see the fire between all the trees. But when we got closer, it was apparent that something was very wrong. The campsite was ransacked, tent ripped up and destroyed, and my backpack emptied with all its contents thrown across the site. I shined my light around and didn't see anything, but I was horrified. I quickly gathered up what I could from the ground and threw it back into my bag. I only managed to get maybe half of what was around before I noticed Sammy staring into the dark trees, eyes locked on something. I left the rest of the stuff and hurried away from there. The walk back to the truck was a bit over an hour. Sammy stayed quiet and timid alongside me the whole way, and I don't think we were followed. But considering how well hidden whoever was out there was, it's hard to know for sure. We got back to the truck and went back home, and avoided that campsite in the years following. Sammy got better after just a few days, and she actually wasn't injured or harmed physically in any way. So the way her collar was ripped from her still has me really confused. I mentioned this happened back in 2015, so Sammy actually passed away a couple of years ago. In the grief, I guess I wanted to go back to that campsite for answers